Guidance is internal. Ignition sequence starts. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Permission to board. Permission to come aboard. Permission to board. Permission to bring me aboard. Permission to come aboard.
Welcome to the Permission Granted podcast. Here's DA.
Welcome inside episode number 2 of the brand new Permission Granted podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed the first episode. That was great with Pat O'Brien and Kenny and Mraz breaking down the vacations of all the hosts, etc. So if you want to catch that, that's obviously still available. We'll archive all of these. And if you are listening to this on YouTube, remember we're on iTunes as well. So if you want to take it with you wherever you go on the iPhone or the iPad or whatever, you can find us in the iTunes store. So we're there, and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're on iTunes, leave some feedback. If you're listening to this on your iPad or iTunes or iPhone, we are on YouTube, so you can, watch it at work, have it on your desktop or whatever. Just go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/TheDA Show. We'll put them all on both of those. So that's very cool. And this episode should be a lot of fun because later on, we're going to be doing a lot of fantasy football. We know that this is the week that most people have their fantasy football drafts. So Brock and Mraz are going to be back at it, breaking that down. Also, me and Mraz will break down some fantasy stuff as well. And for the long-form interview, which is what we love about this podcast because it gives us some more space and time to do some longer things than we normally do on the radio when we're kind of squeezed into an 8 or 10-minute block to make sure we kind of get in and out of the radio breaks and commercials and everything like that. We have a longtime head coach in college football. Tommy Bowden spent nearly a decade at Clemson. He had come to Clemson from Tulane. At Tulane, they had a couple of great years, including a 12-0 season in '98, where they finished in the top 10 in both polls, so that was huge. He ends up at Clemson, spends nearly a decade there, and had very good season at Clemson, but the pressure mounted each and every year to win the ACC, which never happened, to go to major bowl games. And eventually, in the middle of the season, Tommy resigned, and that led to his assistant, Dabo Sweeney, getting the job, and now Dabo's still there. So really interesting. I'm very interested to get to Tommy's perspective on 2014 in college football, and he's got a good perspective on modern ACC today in the ACC because he's co-host of the ACC Blitz on the ACC Network. The ACC Network Game of the Week starts the season this Saturday. Georgia Southern takes on NC State. And the ACC Blitz begins at noon Eastern. You can go to the website raycomsports.com for all the local TV clearances for that if you want to check that out. And Tommy was a 2-time ACC Coach of the Year as well at Clemson. And he joins us here on the DA Show and the Permission Granted podcast and all things are relevant to the show. Coach, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate the time. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you. Getting ready for kickoff of college football coming up here shortly.
Man, there's no question about it. It has all of our juices flowing. And I wonder for you, having been in the game for so long, now compared to out of the game, how different is it going into the start of the season? I guess no more stress for you.
It's a lot different. When I walked out of that studio on Saturday, I hadn't lost a game. I can sure pick them. I'm a lot smarter now than when I was coaching. But, I enjoy watching it. And the thing about now, I work on Saturday, so I show Saturday with the ACC Blitz is live, and I fly home. So I miss most of the games on Saturday. Just read about them usually. But I watch Thursday night games a little bit on Friday night.
It's interesting, how you got into coaching following your father. I mean, a lot of guys, a lot of sons will go one of two ways. They'll say, boy, I do not want to do what my dad did. I saw him, whatever it was, accounting or construction or coaching, and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to kind of go my own way. And then there are others that say, I got to do what dad did. Why did you follow your father through the coaching ranks?
With me and my brothers, Terry and Jeff, they're in coaching. He did not encourage or discourage us from going into it. We saw, in fact, I have an older brother that did not go into coaching. So, we were around the environment. We all, I played in college, Terry played in college, my brother Jeff played in college. We played in college. Terry went and got his law degree. Thought he might do something else. But I kind of knew at an early age that I wanted to. But he did not, like I said, he didn't paint a bad picture of it or or a real healthy picture of it. He just let us make our own mind up, and that's where most of us migrated to.
So you had a pretty realistic perspective on what coaching was, and I guess it wasn't Pollyanna. It wasn't glossed over. You knew what the hard parts were going to be when you got into it because of your dad.
Yeah, and when I was in college, 1974, my father was the head coach. I played wide receiver at West Virginia. He was the head coach. He had a losing season and about got fired. A lot of criticism in the community, in the newspaper, by the students, by my teammates. My teammates actually called a players-only meeting without the head coach, who happened to be my father, which I attended. So I had a first-hand knowledge. When he came home after a win, when he came home after a loss, the goods and the bad. So I had a pretty good idea. And my wife, I've been married 37 years, dated her through college. So my wife had a touch of it, because you got to have a pretty good wife and a strong, independent wife in coaching. So I had a good taste of it early.
How hard is that when your teammates might be criticizing your dad, who's the head coach, man? How do you walk that line?
That's a little bit different. I promise you, sitting there meeting and guys are raising their hands. We're doing too much hit. We're practicing too long, and we need to go in shorts instead of full pads. It was very unusual, and a lot of times they just clear the air and then things go on as normal. Most head coaches don't really buckle in too much when players do things. But it was a very uneasy feeling sitting in there, and I was that was my redshirt sophomore year. So, I a little bit younger, didn't say much, was coming off a redshirt year, but it was unusual.
So you go to Tulane, you're the head coach there. You guys go to a Liberty Bowl, undefeated, and a top 10 ranking, and then you take the Clemson job. Was going up against your dad in conference on an annual basis a deterrent? Did you think about that as a negative, or was that a positive when you took that job?
No, it was a positive, because they were they were on top of the world. He was just kind of still in the run of that 14 10-win season, top 5 finishes. So you're going to have an opportunity to play the best. You could recruit players and say, listen, we're going to play in Florida State and some other schools that were, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best, you got to play the best. So it was more of a recruiting advantage, the fact that they were in the conference and we were playing them. Now, I eventually had to beat them. When I took the job, Florida State had not scored a touchdown in Tallahassee in 8 years, which was 4 games. So they had some work to do, and lost my first 4, but won the last 4 out of 5. So it became a plus the longer I stayed there. But the going there, they at the top of the college world. And he gave me plenty of beatings, I can promise you that.
Jim and John Harbaugh talk about the stress of having to coach against one another. They did it, obviously, in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. When you walk off the field and you beat Dad, is it bittersweet?
Not for me, because I was younger. My father had always accomplished about 300 wins. I only finished up at 90 in 11 and a half years, so I wasn't anywhere close to him. So I enjoyed mine, regardless of whether it was him or not. I didn't care how much my mother felt and my father felt. I was glad I won and glad it was him, because he had plenty. He already had a couple of national championships, so I was trying to do the same thing. So, it really wasn't bittersweet. He had his day in the sun. I was trying to get mine.
Yeah, he had enough of those at that point in time. As you said, he had enough of those, so you didn't have to worry about taking any from him. Recently you said you began to remember your losses more than your wins, and that's kind of when you knew that maybe it was time to get out of coaching when you left Clemson. Does that change over the years you have not been coaching? Do you begin to reflect more on the victories than the losses?
I don't know why. I think more about the losses than I do the wins. Because the losses usually stay with you longer, and the losses is the reason that you're not there any longer anyway. So those seem to stay with you longer. And when, like I said, when I hated losing more than I love winning, and that probably wasn't real healthy. I think the same thing happened, and I think most coaches are like that. They all hate losing. I think Urban Meyer got that like that way at Florida and had to sit out a year or two. That boy just hated losing. He lost a few games there that last year. He was at Florida, so it's not healthy. And but as I look back on it now, I still remember the losses. I remember the passes I dropped as a college receiver more than I do the receptions. and it's probably not good.
Man, there is so much that goes into coaching a Division I football team at this day and age. You know, whether it's trying to keep the players in order, it's recruiting, it's dealing with alumni, it's eligibility, it's media. Obviously, then comes X's and O's, preparing for the opponent. What is the biggest stress in the modern day for a head coach of a major program?
Probably the biggest stress is that the NCAA restricts the amount of time that you can be around your players. You can't have dorms anymore where you can put them all in there. You can only put about 59% of the dorm can be players. But you're held accountable for them 24/7. 24 hours a day, you're held accountable. And you got 19, 20-year-olds. It's during the spring. You don't have a curfew. They might be getting and dabbing a little bit of drugs, a little bit of alcohol. There'll be something coming with the girl. There'll be a death in the family. They'll drinking and driving. Something will happen in class. There's always something. The phone is always ringing. And I think it's the stress of always getting that phone call, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night. The guy got shot. It's just a multiple problems with 85 teenage boys. I have one son, I got one daughter, but they were teenagers together at one time. I had 85 of them, high maintenance guys. And that's probably the biggest stress when the phone rang, and knowing that you were held accountable, at least from the public perception. Say, hey, you're the head coach, you're in charge of those guys, but the NCAA restricts the amount of time you can spend with them.
There's so much media now, and there's so much money that there's huge pressure to win today than there ever before, and that increases every single year. When you finally resigned, you were coming off a 9-win season, and you guys had been bowl eligible for the entire decade. Was that pressure of having to win and having to win big becoming overwhelming, and is that overwhelming for the modern coach?
Well, the standard, when the salaries went up, the standards went up also, and patience went down. And that's, and coaches understand that. And I surely understood it. Going to a place like Clemson, you needed to win a conference championship. And, of course, they didn't have a playoff game my first 4 or 5 years, and they extended the conference with Virginia Tech, Miami. A bunch of changes took place, but still the expectations are still the same. And you live under that. If you don't like it, don't get in the profession. And I understood that. And when you look at Clemson, Frank Howard stayed there, I think, for 30 years. And the next 30 years, they had about 6 coaches. 30 years, they had 1. The next 30, they had 6. So it's a profession where it's tough to stay more than 10 years. And I was there going into my 10th year. I was there 9.5 years. So that did not shock me. But again, as the head coach, that's what you're held accountable for is not only winning the right games, but winning enough games. And don't do it, then they'll find somebody else that will.
When you left, there were players that were upset about it, but there were some players that were kind of openly critical of you. Quarterback Cullen Harper said that you got what you deserved and that guys had jumped off the bandwagon. He didn't appreciate that you thought that you had called him out publicly. Did you ever reconcile with Cullen or speak to any of the guys?
That did not bother me because, he was a competitor. You want guys that football means a lot to him. And, he was 19, 20 or 21, whatever it was, and I was sitting there at 50-something. I understood the pressure of the profession. But we have since communicated, and I think he's written a letter and explained to me that he apologized, and which I was grateful. It didn't bother me whether I got one or not. I surely did not hold it against him, but we have communicated since then.
Some say that Clemson is one of the most difficult places to win because the expectations are national title or bust, and they haven't won one in nearly 30 years. Are those expectations a good thing for the program or kind of impossible to live up to?
Oh, I think they need to be realistic with their expectations, and they got in a little bit of trouble after they won that first one back in '81. So they're really difficult to get. I think Georgia's only had one, if I'm not mistaken. And gosh, up until Steve Spurrier had one at Florida, I think they had one for a long time. For Urban Meyer went there. So they're difficult to get, but there's nothing wrong with having those expectations and that being your goal. I think you need to be realistic. When I went there, facility-wise, they had some of the worst facilities in the conference. They had the biggest stadium, but the facility, the players only go in the stadium 6 times a year. That weight room, the locker room, the dressing room, they're staying there 365 days a year. And as soon as I left, they had just finished a $50 million project with an indoor facility and new locker rooms and dressing rooms. So they're addressing the needs. And when they do that, when they put money in the program, the expectations are to continue to remain high. But a national championship is the goal. I think you can be realistic how you can accomplish it.
Well, those facilities, that arms race that is happening has created a divide between programs. And, I think we're probably going to see more of a divide, right? Because now the Power 5 conferences have autonomy in some ways. Do you think that divide is going to be bad for college football in the long term?
If I was the head coach of Clemson, no. Head coach of Tulane, yes. Oh, yeah, I think we're fixing to get a Division 1A and Division 1B. And I feel sorry for the Boise States and the Central Floridas, the Cincinnatis, and Mid-American Conference Terriers, the head coach up there at Acting, the WAC and the MAC, and because they play good football. But I've even heard rumors where the super conferences are only going to play the super conferences. And if that happens, then all this money generated from the playoff system is going to go to super conferences if they only schedule each other. So it's fixed to be the rich are going to get richer and the haves and the have-nots. And I think it's going to create a big division. The culture and the climate of college football and the landscape, this is going to change it dramatically. And I don't know what I don't think it's going to be good for those bottom 60 schools.
You have been on the inside of college football from a coaching standpoint, in a front office, in a program, and on the outside now, looking in as media. When you view college football, do you think that the decision makers, the power brokers, do they have the best interest of student athletes in mind, or the university, or has it become so much about money that you see all these decisions driven simply by dollar bills and guys' salaries?
No, I don't think the president's had the best interest of the student athlete in mind. Give you an example. It used to be attending. Presidents complain about the amount of time athletes spend away from school and the ability to study in classes. So they go, and the presidents vote on not only a 10-game schedule, they vote on an 11-game schedule. They vote on a 12-game schedule against the desires of the head coaches and the athletic directors. They do it anyway, simply for the money generated. And even a place like Duke, where Duke breaks the graduation record every year on players that graduate, football players that graduate, but about every 4 or 5 years they fire their coach. Well, if the objective is to graduate your players, you ought to be giving them a raise instead of firing. David Cutlass has turned that thing around. But no, I think the players, the college presidents didn't understand, and that's why you're seeing this separation, the autonomy given to 5 super conferences, driven by the SEC. Those SEC presidents understand if you're going to make money, you better spend money, and they understand the power of the head coach and the football program, and they're the ones driving this thing, and everybody else is jumping on board. But they understand. Those SEC presidents, they understand.
Yeah, well,
now the rest of the they understand.
The SEC has expanded, obviously, and they want a bigger geographical footprint, and they've driven the bus on the SEC network, which follows the Big Ten network, and now we have the ACC network, etc. But does it feel, do other conferences, other coaches, ADs, feel like the SEC is almost the tail that wags the dog in college football because they are so influential?
Yeah, but I think they do feel that way, but they're reaping the benefits. Mike Stipe has done a great job there. And when I was at Tulane, he was commissioner of Conference USA before he went to the SEC. He's got a legal background as a lawyer, and he's very ambitious. He's got great foresight on what college football needs to do. And I think the other conferences and commissioners are all jumping on board. And I don't think they mind at all, because it was SEC's lead, I think, that this thing has starting to materialize. And they all jumped on board pretty quick. And they got the NCAA's attention and the rest of the college president's attention. And but I don't think they mind at all that the SEC took the lead, and they're kind of the lead dog right now.
You've kept the door open to getting back into coaching. If you did go back, would you approach it differently, or would you go right back in with your attitude that you were at Tulane and you had at Clemson?
Yeah, like I said, it's not that we want that. It's hard to win. I won 90 games in 11 and a half years. That's not too bad. I do things the same way. I think you always become a better coach. You evaluate yourself, and you see where you might have made some mistakes with your either in staff or how you handle this one issue or how you handle alumni or whatever. I think you always learn the longer you're in the profession. I always try to evaluate myself after every year and try to make adjustments I felt were necessary for us to be successful. So I would go in with a general philosophy being the same. Offensive philosophies have changed a little bit. Defenses have changed a little bit since I've been out. So I think it'd be important who you hire as your coordinators and your staff. But the one thing I've probably learned more than anything since I've been out, those 9 guys you have on your staff, I always thought you have to have good X and O coaches, good communicators, good teachers, but they better be good recruiters. And my evaluation of coaches based on recruiting ability has probably been elevated a notch or two more so than when I was a coach.
How has recruiting changed? I mean, you were at Tulane. It's now 15 years ago. That's not really that long ago, but it feels like the entire landscape has changed because of social media, technology, and how kids interact these days. How different is that?
Well, you just mentioned key social media. Social media, these guys coaches are involved with the player a lot more in detail. It's a lot more often. And then they're making decisions earlier. I think I saw in Mississippi State not long ago had 27 commitments. Kids hadn't even started their senior year. Players are committing earlier than 15 years ago. The social media has made it a lot more detailed. You can't recruit a tailback and tell him he's the only guy. He's your top guy, because he's going to put it on Facebook, or he's going to tweet it, and the other 3 tailbacks they're recruiting are going to know that night what you're telling him when you leave his home. He ain't the only guy. You're not the only tailback he's recruiting, or the number 1 guy. So you really have to be careful what you do and what you say, because it'll be out there with a cell phone, with a picture, with a tweet on Facebook, and so that would be the biggest change that I see in recruiting. With how you have to deal with guys. They're making decisions early. They can go on YouTube and they go on videos. They can get educated about university a lot more quicker than they could years ago when you had to drive to the campus. You only had limited time to do it. So as a coach now, you have to recruit year-round. And I think this new super conference, they're going to rewrite some of these NCAA rules to their advantage, where their coaches can have a little bit of time off. They got no time off now. They're recruiting right through the season, through the summer. And I think they're going to burn themselves out. But I think they'll have a finger on that, on how they're going to deal with it.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about the biggest celebrity, if that's a fair term, in the ACC, and that's Jameis Winston, obviously, coming off a national championship and a Heisman. Since you're watching the ACC on a daily basis, there's some criticisms that Jameis Winston's charisma comes off as smugness or arrogance. Do you think his attitude can actually be a detriment or a negative as they tried to repeat after the national championship last year?
That's one thing I noticed when I was at the ACC Media Days and we had our private interviews with him. He does have a strong personality. He's very confident. He's very self-assured. Unfortunately, that comes off as smug. I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong, but that's his personality. After I spent some time with him, that's him. And, people want to see, unfortunately, a frown on your face and some sulking when you're being remorseful about some bad decisions you've made. And he doesn't have... he smiles. That's just his personality. It's unfortunate that people hold that against him, but I think you can be remorseful and be sincere without having to frown or sulk. But I can see after spending time with him, that man is upbeat and he is positive. He's 100 miles ahead. He makes mistakes. I'm going ahead, and this is the attitude I'm taking, the attitude I'm doing it with. And some people see that as a negative, but you spend some time around him. He's very impressive, and but a lot of it, he smiles. He smiles a lot.
Smiles a lot, man. Smiles more than any of us. Knowles are the best team in the ACC, right? There's no doubt about that going into the year?
Nah, there's separation between us. There's separation between them and Clemson, but there's also separation between Clemson and the rest. But, yes, they are the best. They've got the best players. They've got the best depth. And not Jimbo Fisher's got one under his belt, but he's got an idea on how to get another one.
Tommy Bowden, 2-time ACC Coach of the Year, spent nearly a decade at Clemson, and now co-host of the ACC Blitz and the ACC Network. ACC Network Game of the Week starts on Saturday. Georgia Southern at NC State, so the season is here, which is outstanding. The ACC Blitz begins at noon, and you can visit raycomsports.com for local TV clearances. Coach, it is so good to catch up with you. We enjoy your work on the show. Thank you so much, and hopefully we can do it again during the season. This was really fun.
So let's do it again during the season. And Paul Johnson must not have seen that Georgia Southern Florida game. I wouldn't have scheduled Georgia Southern. He must have missed that week. But let's do it again and see where we stand in the middle of the season.
That'd be great, man. Thank you so much, Coach. Really appreciate it.
Hey, happy week. Thank you.
All right, fantastic stuff with Tommy Bowden right there, and opened up a lot about the pressures and really the flaws that go into a career surrounding yourself with successes on the football field, that it just always sticks with you. Mraz joins me now following the conversation with Bowden. That's got to feel like a pretty difficult life. No light at the end of the tunnel, Mraz, when you are sitting still years after your career ended on the losses, not the wins.
It's pretty crazy to put yourself in a coach's shoes like that, because I think a lot of us as fans just look at a coach and you're ready to fire him at any waking moment,
right,
without realizing and knowing that, we go through our own stresses and jobs. How much stress these guys go through to sit there mentally, how much that has to be wearing on you, that you're just thinking about losses more than all the great wins you may have had in your career, on top of all the other stresses he had brought up throughout this interview.
Well, we also look at their money, right? We say, well, it's worth it. And Bowden kind of suggested that as well. The money has gone up, so expectations go up. But we look at a guy that makes $6 million a year, $4 million a year, $1 million a year, whatever, and say, well, you got to perform, you got to go. And as you said, we're waiting for everybody to get fired at the end of the year. And here's a guy that is like, for all that he accomplished, I mean, he still totally holds on to the stresses and the faults that he didn't come through with.
It is pretty crazy to sit there and know that there are probably times where he goes to bed at night and just, if only I kicked a field goal there, if only I had done that. It's insane. And I thought the other part that he brought up, which was pretty crazy with these stresses, is with the NCAA rules, how he wishes he could spend more time with the players, because he basically sits there and waits for a dreaded phone call at midnight or 11 p.m. that somebody got arrested for a DWI or something. To go through that mindset day in and day out, it's got to wear on you.
Well, also the crazy expectation of every college football fan base, because when you are at Clemson or anywhere in the SEC, when you're at Florida State or places in the Big Ten like Michigan or Ohio State, places in the Pac-12 like USC, Texas, Oklahoma, it's win a national championship or bust. And at Clemson, in his tenure, maybe it wasn't win a national championship, but it was win the ACC. And this is a time when Florida State was very good, and they still couldn't get over the hump. And so, those coaches, look, they're paid really, really well. But the pressure today versus the pressure at any time in history is greater. And it does, I'm very interested to hear how Clemson fans respond to this interview, because we have a ton of them that listen in South Carolina. And I'm interested to hear if now they kind of say, well, it was a pretty good run for 10 years with them, or if they still have that resentment like a lot of college fan bases do year in, year out. We didn't win the big one. We didn't win the conference, so it's a failure, and that's all we're focusing on, kind of like he suggested.
Yeah, it's pretty, and you could compare it in a way. College fan bases can be a little more rabid, but almost to an NFL side of things with Andy Reid. How many Eagle fans resent Andy Reid, when in reality, those 4 NFC championship games were the glory years as an Eagle fan, but many of them look back at Andy Reid's tenure and consider it a failure.
Yeah, and I thought it was also interesting how we got into some of the players that were openly critical of Bowden by the end of his tenure at Clemson. That's not something you often see. I mean, college kids are usually kind of by the book. They're media trained at this point not to say anything bad about their former coach or whatever. And you had multiple guys kind of come out and publicly say he lost the team, we weren't listening to him, he got what he deserved. I mean, those are not normally things you hear from 19 and 20-year-olds.
No, not at all. And to his credit, he doesn't really hold a grudge, as he mentioned, like that. So you take that and you kind of put yourself in his shoes. Man, it's a wearing job. It really gets on you.
Well, he's got to take the high road because he's the adult and he's the former coach and he's on TV now. But, yeah, I thought that was interesting. All right, so this is Fantasy Football Week here on the DA Show, CBS Sports Radio, and in everyone's life, because this will be the week that most people have fantasy drafts, or next week before the NFL season begins. NFL season begins a week from Thursday. So let's go over a little fantasy action for our listeners. Mraz, how many leagues are you in?
I'm in actually 3, and I try to limit it to 3. I know
Why 3?
Well, I'm in one at CBS Sports Radio. I'm in an office one at the other radio station down the hall, and one with my general friend. So I didn't want to make anybody unhappy that I'm picking one of their leagues over another.
You're a people pleaser.
I'm a people pleaser. I'm not a pickle eater, but I'm a people pleaser.
That's too much. How can you possibly pay attention to 3 leagues?
Football, I think, is the only sport in which you could do it, because the other sports you're checking every day. All you need to really do with your fantasy team is really grind in on a Wednesday or a Thursday and get your roster set.
All right, so let's do a few fantasy sleepers here for people having their draft. My draft comes up on I think it's a week from Wednesday. So next Wednesday, when do you have your drafts?
I actually have already had one, and I have both coming up on Labor Day Monday night.
I only do one draft. That's it. I do one roster, one draft, one league for money. I'm not playing not for money anymore. I can't take the stress if it's not for money. Are all these three for money for you?
They have to be. I'm not sitting around in a fun league. I'm not in high school anymore.
No. Fun league is out. Money league is in. Not that we're telling anybody to gamble at this point, but okay. Fantasy sleepers. Give me your first fantasy sleeper.
I actually like Toby Gerhart, running back Jaguars. He's in that ground and pound system. The Jaguars' defense came on late last year.
Great white hope.
Yes, I actually think the Jaguars are going to be a lot better than people think. I don't think they're going to be picking first overall in the draft next year. And I think eventually Blake Bortles is going to slide in there, and they're going to attack on the ground. And I think Gerhart's the kind of guy who I think maybe not your top running back, but as your number 2 running back is going to get you a lot of solid numbers.
I think they'll be better than people expect as well. That might only be 6 and 10, 7 and 9, but I think they'll be a little bit better. My number 1 sleeper, how about Zach Stacy, Rams running back? After the injury to Sam Bradford, they'll probably run the football a lot. I can't imagine they put it up through the air a lot. So Stacy would be my number 1 fantasy sleeper. Next one for you?
I'm going Terrence Williams, wide receiver of the Cowboys.
Really?
He really came on last year. And the reason I say...
Even if Whedon is thrown to him?
Well, that's the one thing you have to worry about, because Whedon is a bum.
Yes.
You have to worry about if Romo gets hurt, which I don't think Romo plays a 16. But I think the way you look at this, the Cowboys' defense is so atrocious that they have no choice but to have to air it out to try to stay in these games. And that might end up hurting Romo in the long run with taking hits. But eventually... you're going to have Jason Witten, you're going to have Dez Bryant. Defenses can key in on those guys. Terrence Williams is there to be their number 2 guy, and I think he's going to collect solid numbers in that offense.
They're going to have to put up so many yards to stay competitive in these games. I think their offense is good enough to do it, but they're going to have to throw the football, run the football, and Romo's going to have to stay upright. All right, my next sleeper is going to be Bishop Sankey, rookie running back for Tennessee. I think Sankey was the first running back taken in the NFL draft, right? That was his kind of claim to fame this year.
Exactly. Nobody was taken in the first round, but yeah, he went.
In the second round. And Tennessee has a good offensive line. Again, with that quarterback situation, I don't think they're going to throw the football a whole heck of a lot either. So I like Sankey as my next fantasy sleeper. Your third?
I'm going to go also another rookie. How about Jason Morrow out of A&M going to the Jets as their tight end? I've actually broken down a lot of Jets film in the preseason, more than I would like.
You're terrifying. You've seen so much preseason football.
I've watched more preseason games than I can handle. And I actually like what Amaro's bringing to the table. I don't think he's going to be a skittish tight end. He can handle himself blocking, which means he's going to see the field. And in that Marty Mornhinweg offense, they're going to like to use the tight end. I think he could become Geno Smith's best friend on the field with Decker out there also. They have a good run game. I think Amaro is going to catch some touchdowns this year.
He's a tweener, though, right? I mean, he's not really big as a tight end to fend off linebackers, so most of his success is going to come against safeties and corners.
Yeah, he reminds a lot of people of Dallas Clark. He's kind of fitting that similar mold. Now, he doesn't have Peyton Manning throwing to him, but I think Jason Morrow is going to put up some touchdowns this year, more so than yards. I think he's going to be a red zone threat, and he's going to get in the end zone.
My third fantasy sleeper is going to be another tight end, a guy that was just traded by the New England Patriots for Tim Wright from the Buccaneers. I think he had 60 catches last year in the Buccaneers offense, and that was an offense that had not great quarterbacking, certainly with Josh Freeman and Josh McCown kind of saved things. Or not Josh McCown, Mike Glennon. Now Josh McCown's in there to save things. So Wright might be good, but that's only going to be if Gronk is banged up. I just don't trust the Patriots wide receivers. And so I think a lot of targets are going to go to the tight ends. And if Gronk is banged up or they do a lot of 2 tight end sets, it might be right. All right, so let's move on now to the top 10 because I think a lot of, with drafts coming up, a lot of fantasy owners are going to be looking at, the big decisions to be made. At number 1, would you take Adrian Peterson or LaShawn McCoy?
I would take LaShawn McCoy, and I actually feel like Adrian Peterson is going to let down a little bit this year. I think eventually the miles on Adrian Peterson's tires catch up to him. And I think an interesting note here about Adrian Peterson, he's no longer playing his games indoors. They're playing outdoors, which I think might have a little bit of effect on him as the cold weather hits later in the year.
It'll be interesting to see when Teddy Bridgewater gets in there because eventually he is going to be in there. Now, will that hurt that offense or help? And how will that affect Adrian Peterson? But I agree. I'm going to go LaShawn McCoy's number 1 simply because of all the passing yards he's going to rack up in that offense. Adrian Peterson is not going to have nearly that many receiving yards with Minnesota. All right, first quarterback off the board. Would it be Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees?
I actually think Drew Brees.
Really?
I think Drew Brees, now he has Brandon Cooks now on the inside. I think something special is happening with the Saints this year. I think they turn into the team to beat in the NFC, and I think Brees puts up more record-breaking numbers this year.
I'm going to go Aaron Rodgers, even though Peyton Manning had monster numbers last year. probably comes back a little bit from the pack. We worry about that offense after the loss of Decker and now Wes Welker early. And so I would go Rodgers as my first quarterback. And finally, first wide receiver or first target in the pass game would be Calvin Johnson or Jimmy Graham.
I'm going to go Jimmy Graham because Calvin Johnson's in the first year of a new offense where his numbers might be a little slow to start the year. He's playing some good defenses early. I actually think Jimmy Graham, now that he's worked out his contract differences, he wants to prove that he should be considered a wide receiver. I think he gets big numbers, like I just mentioned with Drew Brees.
Yeah, I think that the Saints offense is better than the Lions offense this year. Again, people know I'm not a big Jim Caldwell fan. I think the Lions could come back, and that would be a bad thing for that offense, so I would agree. I'd probably go Graham over Calvin Johnson, but boy, Megatron is so good, so big, so talented in his prime. It's hard to imagine him not having a crazy good year anyway. All right, so that's our little fantasy action here between Mraz and I. Mraz and Brock take you next through some more fantasy action and some behind the scenes of the DA show here on the Permission Granted podcast, available on iTunes and on YouTube.
All right, welcome into Side B of the Permission Granted podcast, the producers portion of the podcast with myself, Mraz, Kenny Brock on the Wheels of Steel here with me. You just heard Tommy Bowden on with DA. Great, insightful interview from the former coach, now turned ACC analyst. If that doesn't get your football juices flowing, I don't know what will. College ready to rock, NFL ready to rock. If you're a sports fan, this is the time of year you live for. And Kenny, this week is a very important week for a lot of people into the NFL. A lot of people who maybe aren't just zoned in on their one team they root for. It's fantasy football draft week. Everybody's locked in, ready to go. I know you're in an office fantasy league here,
right?
As well as I am. Everybody across the country, fantasy football has taken off as a phenomenon, and we're really looking forward to that portion of the football season as well.
Yeah, I've already had one draft this week. I have another one coming up next week as well. So it's, you're doing the research, you're watching every kind of preseason game that you can, reading any sort of articles on possible injuries or what kind of guys to expect to rise and fall. And, it's really tough to make the determination of, what guys to go after, coming off of injuries, or what kind of, guys are we looking forward to having big years. So, it'll be a lot of fun once we get kicked off in a couple weeks.
Yes, and we'll avoid the obvious ones here. Everybody expects Shady McCoy to have a big year.
Right.
Peyton Manning, Brady, these guys.
Rodgers.
It's useless for me and you to go over these names and discuss them. But, we're going to just bounce off a couple names to you. There's a couple people here who I feel are due for letdown years. Maybe you will as well. And there's a couple rookies coming into the league that maybe a lot of NFL fans who aren't as honed in on the college or aren't realizing could be big factors in these fantasy drafts and guys that could slip through the cracks and get them in the late rounds.
Right. We've seen how quickly rookies can come in and contribute right away to, the NFL offenses because of how sophisticated the college game has become. So that is really, like you said, a great thing to look for late in the draft. If you're looking for a wide receiver or a running back, hopefully we can give you a couple tips on guys to maybe keep your eye out for and set up in your queue and then grab them late in the 9th or 10th round.
First of all, before we get into the running back set, this was a receiver-heavy draft that's coming out here in the NFL. And there's several guys here. Sammy Watkins, everybody's high on at Buffalo. Mike Evans, everybody's high on at Tampa. Yeah, those are guys who I think eventually are going to be keepers and big-time receivers. I don't know if I'd be so quick to draft them this year. Their quarterback situations are very iffy. For me, maybe you feel the same way. The rookie wide receiver to go after in this year's draft is Brandon Cooks.
Far and away. I've talked about him on the show numerous times when we were talking about the NFL Combine and then leading into the draft. I said that he was going to be the rookie of the year, and going to the Saints only affirms that for me. He's an absolute stud. He's a playmaker in space. He has great hands. He's speedy, and I think with Drew Brees and Jimmy Graham and Marcus Colston and everything else with that Saints high-powered offense, Sean Payton's going to find a million ways to get him involved right away.
Yes, and again, I have no problem drafting Watkins or Evans, and as you just alluded to, Cooks, I think, is the number one guy if you're going to draft a rookie wide receiver, and I'd still go with those other guys. Odell Beckham hasn't even seen the field with the Giants in the preseason.
Right.
I'd stay away from him. The other guy who I think could be an interesting guy to draft later on, maybe not a starting wide receiver on your fantasy team, a guy to come off the bench and keep on your bench as the season progresses. One of your Philly boys, how about Jordan Matthews in that Eagles offense?
Yeah, I was a little skeptical of Jordan Matthews. I didn't really remember much of him from Vanderbilt, and then I went back and watched a couple games, and boy, is he a speedster. He's a tall, lanky guy, but he has hands, and he's got speed to burn. And I really think that he's going to be a great fit in that Chip Kelly offense. With the loss of Deshaun Jackson,
Right.
Macklin coming off the knee injury, you're probably not going to get the same kind of thing from Riley Cooper that you did last year. They're going to need somebody to step up, and I think Jordan Matthews is a great fit in that role.
Yeah, I got the sense when Chip Kelly was drafting. I know your inner Eagle fan turned out. You weren't happy early on with that draft.
Right.
But Jordan Matthews, the more I've seen from him watching in the preseason, not that the preseason means a whole heck of a lot.
No, but for a guy like that, he's coming in and he's playing against the one, so you want to
Yes.
see how he can compete right away. He's not playing against the twos and the threes.
Right, and you can have all the athletic ability you want at wide receiver and make all the plays you want, but you have to understand the playbook and understand the routes you're running. And a lot of times these rookie wide receivers come into the league, and they're overmatched as far as learning the book and learning the proper routes. From everything I've seen from Jordan Matthews, he looks like he could stick it. And Nick Foles is going to need a guy because he threw a lot of those lame duck passes that Deshaun Jackson bailed him out on. And there needs to be a guy in that Philly offense, whether it be Macklin, but I think it could be Matthews. I think that's a guy to look out for in fantasy in that up-tempo Eagle offense that could give you some numbers.
I really think that is a great steal late in your fantasy draft. I mean, obviously, the Chip Kelly offense is only going to get more sophisticated and more, up-tempo as the season gets on. And as Matthews gets more comfortable, as Mraz said, maybe you don't start him the first 7 or 8 weeks, but you start him the second half of the season, and all of a sudden you get a couple hundred yards and a couple touchdown receptions, and it looks like a really smart sleeper pick.
Right, and now let's get into the running backs here, because when we entered this NFL draft, running backs were not at a premium early in the draft. As we said, it was receiver heavy,
Right.
some good defensive players in there, some offensive linemen. The running backs all fell.
Right.
And now you have basically a boatload of these running backs that all look like they're going to get some playing time for their teams. I'm going to run through some of the names. Bishop Sankey with the Titans.
Great player at Washington.
Andre Williams with the Giants.
Great player at
Carlos
BC.
Hyde with the 49ers.
Of course, an Ohio State Buckeye.
Terrence West with the Browns. Now,
Towson Tiger played in a national championship game and won AA. A lot of people didn't see him. He is an absolute monster.
right, a guy that, if you remember a couple weeks ago, we did the bit on the show where he's sending some nude selfies, if you will.
Well, no, he was getting the nude selfies.
Oh, he was getting the nude selfies.
Yeah, he went
That's
after some
right.
guy's wife on Instagram, and then
Big
whatever,
man code bust.
Yeah, a lot of things went wrong for him. He got a lot of pics that he didn't appreciate.
Right,
I'm sure.
he got some selfies that I don't think he pretty much
He wasn't
responded.
planning on getting those. No, he was
Well,
looking for some other features.
I don't know if that'll affect his fantasy stats, but
I highly doubt it.
Jeremy Hill with the Bengals, Trey
Yeah.
Mason with the Rams, got to
Right.
keep his eye on, and Devontae Freeman, who, if you're watching Hard Knocks, you're pretty familiar with.
Right.
So, Kenny, you're a guy who's watched all these guys. You're the college football buff. Coming
Right.
into the league, you know the teams these guys are on. Who might be the best fit if you're going to take a rookie running back late?
I honestly, and it might be the Hard Knocks, taking over, but I really love what I've seen out of Devontae Freeman thus far in camp. I think that he is a quick, agile guy who he's a dual threat. He can run the ball. He can find those little gaps. And then if you want to dump it out to him in the flat, or you want to set up a screen, or you want to swing it out to him, in the backfield, he can take off. I really think that, because we know how Steven Jackson is injury prone.
Exactly.
So you're going to need that guy, and they're going to need to fall back on him. And I really think that Devontae Freeman is going to come in and make an impact right away. Now, do I think that he's going to be putting up monster numbers? No, but I think he's going to be putting up serviceable numbers. Sorry. And I think that he probably right now is my number one in terms of rookie running back to take. I think Terrence West is a close two, because I think that they're going to look to lighten the load on Tate and on Brian Hoyer. So I think West is going to get a lot of touches in Cleveland. Those are my top two rookie running backs right now. What about you?
Well, see, if I had to go with it, I think in fantasy you have to look at this twofold. A lot of times you're entering keeper leagues. So when taking rookies, you run the risk of losing them. I think you're taking them in an effort to think that beyond this year, they are going to be a guy you could keep on your fantasy team for years to come.
Right.
So from that standpoint, I would actually think, in a way, Carlos Hyde with the 49ers. They have Frank Gore there right now.
Right.
But that's a team that's all about ground and pound. And Hyde maybe doesn't put up the big numbers that Gore could put up this year, although I think Gore might take a step back. But I think Hyde is a guy who you could build around and will be a good fit in that 49er offense.
And honestly, he is kind of Frank Gore reincarnated. He's a little slimmer. He's got a little better footwork. But, I mean, they basically are the same kind of runner. They're going to get 35 touches, and they're not going to get, the 15 to 10 yards every single time. They're going to get the 3, they're going to get the 6, and then they're going to break one off for a 40-yard touchdown. That's what Frank Gore's made a career doing. And I think Carlos Hyde, learning under Frank Gore for the next season, I think is a great keeper pick for a long-term fantasy manager.
Right, I think that's fair. And a lot of people are over Bishop Sankey. He's one of those guys, I got to be honest, I did not see a lot of him play out there in the Pac-12. He's done some nice things here in the preseason in camp. A lot of people seem to like him. I could live with that because look what the Titans have done with their running backs in the past.
Right.
They had CJ stay there for a long time, and he doesn't have a lot of competition there where I think he gets a bulk of the carries in Tennessee.
Yeah, I think that he's a good serviceable rookie running back, but I think that the three guys that we've named previous are far superior in terms of guys to have going forward in the draft because Sankey had injury problems at UW. So you wonder, is that going to translate and carry over into the NFL? And that's something you have to think of as a long-term fantasy manager.
Right, we're going to keep things going here. This is the Permission Granted podcast, part of the DA show. Myself here, Mraz with Kenny Brock.
Also, don't forget, after listening to this, don't forget to subscribe to the Permission Granted podcast on iTunes. And also, it's going to be available on YouTube, youtube.com/the DA show. Myself, Mraz, and DA, we will all tweet it out every week once the podcast is live, and then we'll retweet it out a couple more times throughout the week until we get the next podcast up.
Right, so this is your Fantasy Blitz portion of the Permission Granted podcast here. Let's keep going here on the Fantasy Talk. Players due for letdown years that people are in love with at fantasy. I know that's a bit of a tongue twister. Right. I have a couple guys here I'm going to run by you.
Go ahead.
Quarterback portion. There are 3 guys who constantly get drafted in fantasy that I would be prone to stay away from if you already don't have them as a keeper, or maybe try to trade them away if you can get somebody else. Those 3 quarterbacks from here. Cam Newton, I think Carolina has done nothing to help him receiver-wise. I know they drafted Kelvin Benjamin.
But who knows how he's going to step in right away.
Right, and already Newton hurting the ribs here in preseason. Right. That's a guy who just does not learn to stay in the pocket, get hurt. The other guy who has taken an absolute pounding here in the preseason because of their offensive line problems, Colin Kaepernick. He now has his contract, no longer hungry for that contract.
Right.
He's played a lot of football the last 2 years for a young guy. He gets out and runs with those legs. He is taking a beating sitting back there in the pocket. Yes, he could pick up some yards on the ground with his feet, but I'm telling you right now, Kaepernick is a guy I think his fantasy numbers take a hit, and I'm not convinced he plays 16 games this year.
I actually couldn't agree with you more, and we don't agree on much, but I couldn't agree with those 2 guys more. And if I can add a third one in, as an Eagles fan, obviously Nick Foles had a great season last year. We all know his 27 touchdowns to 2 interception ratio that he had. There is no way that he's going to repeat that this season. I think a lot of people are going to look at those stats and be like, oh, well, now with the addition of Jordan Matthews and the growth of Zach Ertz and Jeremy Maclin coming back healthy, he could repeat those numbers. He will not repeat those numbers. And Shady's going to get a ton of carries. Now you have Darren Sproles. He's going to help lighten the load on Shady as well. I would steer so far clear of Nick Foles if you're looking to not draft a quarterback in this fantasy draft.
I can see that. And another NFC East guy, which I think is obvious at this point, a guy who puts up big numbers, Tony Romo.
Right.
Can't count on him to play 16 games.
But he does put up those big numbers in the 13 or so games that he does play, so it's kind of, you have to find a competitive balance there.
He will. And he will be throwing a lot, too, because that defense is putrid.
Awful.
Running back-wise, Adrian Peterson. This is to be noted. Eventually, Adrian Peterson is going to get to a point where he's taking too many carries, and he's going to have a fall-off year. Something to note here. The Vikings are no longer playing indoor home games.
Right.
That cold weather outside late in the year, they'll run the ball, bruise it more, but I'm not so sure Peterson really hangs in there and puts up the lively numbers he put in on the fast track indoors.
I don't know. I saw him a couple times last year, especially one game sticks out late to me. I think he went for over 200 yards late in the season against the Packers in Green Bay. I think it was a late December game, if I remember, and he went for like 232, something like that. So I kind of disagree there. I think Peterson's a workhorse, and I think that he brings a lot to the table. He's going to get those games where he's going for 150 and 4 touchdowns. So me personally, I still like Adrian Peterson. I think that the carries are an issue and that they don't really have a legitimate backup to him. But Mraz and I are obviously on different sides there.
Yeah, exactly. All I'm saying is I think Peterson is on the back half of his fantasy career here. And the other guy we mentioned previously, I think Frank Gore is another guy who's getting a lot of miles there, and they have a good running back situation behind him. He could dip off. Players that I think you should make sure you grab, I'll give you one name right now who I think by the end of the year we could be talking about as the best receiver in football, and that's Keenan Allen of the San Diego Chargers.
That's an interesting pick. I would not have even literally thought about that. He's not even a person that would come up on my radar as someone I would take in the first 10 rounds. And you're saying that he could be the best wide receiver in all of the NFL? Where are you getting this from?
I'm telling you what, he exploded on the scene as a rookie. He has been in the book all offseason. I like Keenan Allen a
You've been
lot.
hanging out with him this offseason?
I've been all over the San Diego Chargers.
You've
here.
been
That's,
all over the San Diego Chargers from New York? How so?
I have been all over the San Diego Chargers. That's a team to keep an eye on. I'm telling you, you're looking at me like I'm nuts with the Keenan Allen.
You are nuts.
Listen,
Keenan Allen, the best wide receiver in the NFL.
I said he could be.
That's the most asinine thing I think you've said to date.
Okay, we'll talk in December. When Santa's coming dropping off the presents and we're having a nice conversation about Keenan Allen, we will have that talk. Rashad Jennings with the Giants. He's been the one positive out of the Giants.
Shock.
Okay,
Shocking,
here we go. Yeah, all right.
The guy had a couple good preseason games, and all of a sudden he's going to be, the next Barry Sanders. Get lost.
I didn't say he's going to be the next Barry Sanders. I just think in that offense is going to be good. Go ahead, throw the snowballs my way, Philly fan.
Enough with the snowballs.
I think Chris Johnson is back and going to have a
batteries at me.
Oh, here we
in
go.
case you forgot.
Can't even continue a conversation.
I'm pretty sure that my finger's still broken. Actually.
Well, you know what? Don't bet on your teams from Philly that stink. You did it with the Flyers. You're going to do it again with the Eagles.
What happened with the
lose.
Rangers in the Stanley Cup?
I'm sorry. Did you just say where the Rangers
lose?
played? I'm pretty sure they played in the Stanley Cup.
They lost though, so it doesn't matter in essence.
All right, we'll get back to how the refs robbed them at a later time when we talk hockey. You know
We're
what?
never going to talk hockey. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. All the great hockey fans out there. You just heard it from Kenny Brock, idiot Flyer fan here on the DA show.
You are constantly reminding everyone how dumb you can be on a consistent basis here on the show. This week, you brought up an interesting topic about losing weight through your feet because DA has an issue where his shoe didn't fit last year, and then he lost 5 pounds, and now his shoe fits. And, you have this whole theory that you lose weight through your feet, which I can't even wrap my mind around still. And I've had a couple days to process it. I mean, where the hell do you come up with this stuff? Honestly, you're either the dumbest person that I know, or you're just pulling the wool over all of our eyes and trolling all of us. Because I honestly, you infuriate me when you say stuff like that. Because you're obviously not, a dumb kid. I say, you're the dumbest person I know in jest and everything like that. You're obviously, got to where you are because you have some sort of smarts, street smarts, not so much, which you claim to have. But it's just like, what are you doing? Do you do this on purpose? Like, do you just try to tick me off on purpose on a daily basis?
I'm starting to think you're a lot stupider than people give you credit for. Let's be fair here, Kenny. When you lose weight in every single body part. What do you think? You just lose it in your gut, lose it in your
Yes, that's where the weight goes. That's where it comes
thighs?
out of.
No,
absolutely.
Come on. You got chunkiness throughout your body, just like you do on your feet. Your feet aren't
My feet
as
aren't
noticeable.
chunky. My feet are bony. I have well-structured
good
feet.
for you. Good for you. Your feet are bony. That's not good. You need a little padding there.
I don't need any sort of padding. I don't have feet problems.
Listen, obviously, you say you're in shape. You do the yoga. You have the man bun. We get
Pilates,
it. All right. We get it all going on. Take it from somebody who's actually gained and lost weight and fluctuation. You can lose weight in your feet.
No,
I think I consider myself a little more of an expert here in this than you would, okay?
Oh, my goodness.
It happens.
I can't even take this seriously.
Okay, pay attention. Start going to the gym with me. Come home and tell me what the sweatiest piece of clothing you take off is. It's a sock. Your sock is the sweatiest piece of clothing, which means weight is out the window.
I am not driving my ass or taking the train out to Long Island every day to watch you go to the gym and go to the gym with you. Well, actually, I kind of do want to do that because I have said from day one that you are not as frequent as a gym goer as you claim to be. You claim to go every day and do 45 minutes on the elliptical. Zero chance. Because if you did, you would already be down 30 pounds. If you said that you are on the regimen that you said, you claim to be on every single day, then there is no way that you wouldn't be down at least 20, maybe 30 or more pounds at this point. We're, 20 months in here to the network? And since I've been working with you, come on.
I think it's the intensity in which I approach my cardio, which I'm going to amp it up. And you will see
I think it's your eating habits, and I think that you don't go to the gym that much.
First of all, you see me at night when we do the show. I eat a banana. I eat a granola bar. It's not like I'm stuffing my face with baked ziti.
Stop it. You have... what? Dude... Your little snack bag over there that you bring in every freaking night. I mean, the amount of food that you put down your gullet in the 4 hours of the show is more than what I intake throughout the day.
Yeah, because you don't even eat a square meal. I'd argue I'm actually healthier than you. Can you eat a square meal for once? For those who don't listen, Kenny basically survives on a bran muffin all day. You tell me if that's healthy.
It's a blueberry muffin or a chocolate chip muffin or red velvet if I'm really feeling frisky.
Speaking of chocolate chip, as you just pronounced it, you behind the scenes, listeners didn't hear this.
I forgot about this.
Okay, listeners don't understand. Kenny, I don't know what. I know. Listen, I have the New York accent. I get that. Kenny does not know how to pronounce words. Kenny, you just called it chocolate chip. It's chocolate chip.
It's not chocolate. It's not chocolate. It's not coffee.
Kenny,
That's New York right there.
It's chocolate chip.
No.
Pronounce it. And now
pronounce it.
Pronounce it. And now Kenny, for those who don't know behind the scenes, yesterday called it vanilla. Now, it might be a Nilla wafer, but overall, when you're ordering ice cream from Mr. Softy, it's vanilla. It's not vanilla.
Where are you getting
when
the
you
vanilla?
When you say a team is not opening up its playbook in the offense, it's a vanilla offense.
It's a vanilla offense.
It's not vanilla.
It's a vanilla. Mraz, V-A-N-I-L-L-A. If you take the V-A and the L-A off the end, it's nil.
Here you go again.
Nil.
Going by the exact spelling. As I pointed out, you don't call it a knife, you don't call it a gnome.
That
it's
is
vanilla.
completely different rules for the English language. This is a straightforward spelling of the word. There's not a random K or a random Z in there. It's vanilla. It is not vanilla. I can't believe that we're having this argument again, because that was one of the more heated arguments that we had behind the scenes. We were at each other's throats. It was so much so that I had to go to Merriam-Webster's website and find vanilla and have it pronounce. Look, now you got me saying pronounce. And have it pronounce it. And it came out vanilla. And Mraz said, well, that's wrong. Oh, yeah, Merriam-Webster's wrong.
Merriam-Webster is an idiot, okay? She is an idiot. We'll leave it up to the listeners here listening to the Permission Granted podcast. Let us know. Is it vanilla? Is it vanilla? Is it chocolate? Is it chocolate?
Also, speaking of idiots, Schwartzo down in Florida for his family vacation, as we recapped on the show, nearly got pinched and had to do a dime down in freaking Florida because he
couldn't handle a dime.
He couldn't handle 2 hours in jail. Let's be honest. You know, he couldn't eat as much as he wants, and the bathroom usage he would have big problems with down there.
I've seen Orange is the New Black. The bathroom usage is tough over there.
I haven't seen Orange is the New Black. I may have to get into that. But, I mean, this guy basically, you know, He's yelling at his kids, who apparently are completely out of control. The inmates are running the asylum in the Schwartzo household, dancing on tables at restaurants. My parents would take me out back and smack me on the behind a couple of times if that's how I was being.
Well, to Schwartz's credit, he didn't smack his kid on the behind, so therefore he didn't get locked up. But you know what? I think it would have made all of our days. And you know what? Schwartz could have had a good laugh afterwards if he got arrested and got cleared later. If the cops at least put him in the cuffs, it would have ended that story perfectly.
He needs 2 cuffs, by the way. There's no way he's putting those big bear paws in one set of cuffs. They're going to need 2 separate ones to hook those
Imagine
things.
Schwartz, basically trying to rip through the cuffs there.
He tries going Incredible Hulk.
Oh, asking the cop behind the cell if he could have a Diet Pepsi. Boy, that would be some scene.
You guys listen to WFAN?
Oh, boy. Fireman Ed would get the last laugh there.
There's no doubt the cheeseburgers would not be flowing down there in Boca Raton Cell Block C. That'll wrap up the Side B portion of the Permission Granted podcast. Remember, go to iTunes, subscribe to the Permission Granted podcast page. Also, rate us on iTunes. There's a star system. A 1 star, obviously the worst. Hopefully you don't think that this is the worst podcast
if they go by your pronunciations, they may.
Oh, jeez, oh, man. And then there's, obviously the 5. So, some greatest somewhere in between, just so we have some feedback on the show, so we know how to curtail this podcast, because obviously this is for you, the listeners. And also, don't forget, this will also be available on youtube.com/the DA Show page. You can comment there. Any sort of, thoughts, feelings on the podcast, things you'd like to see changed, possibly things you'd like to see discussed. You can always tweet at Mraz and I. I'm at KBrockJR. Mraz is at Sean Morash, CBS, ShaunMorash,
Yeah, good. You're very good with the spelling bee.
Go ahead. You want to give it to him?
No, you just did. You nailed it. Sean Morash, CBS. The right way to spell it.
Yeah, Sean Morash. There's no. You're the first person I've met that's ever spelled their name that way.
Okay. Former Giants safety Sean Williams.
Who?
Sean Taylor, former safety of the Redskins. They all spelled it that way. Sean King.
No, Sean Taylor. Who? Sean Taylor of the Redskins?
Yeah.
He did not spell it that way.
You want to take a bet?
Guaranteed it's SEAN. There is no doubt in my mind you are so wrong on this. Anyways, we got to wrap it up here. We got to get going. We appreciate you checking out the Permission Granted podcast. Make sure you check it out. Subscribe on iTunes. Check it out on the YouTube page, youtube.com/The DA Show. Also Facebook, facebook.com/The DA Show. And we'll talk to you again next week.